I am really, really happy to be here tonight. The pension boards, I think with great wisdom, has selected a text that kind of captures their celebration over this period of time. And they wisely, in my view, have selected from Paul's letter to the church in Philippi. And so I'm going to read you just a few verses out of that and focus on the one that's kind of the central one for this event, and it's actually printed piece of it on your as a kind of slogan on your table setting tonight. It's from the first chapter. It's really part of the original salutation that Paul writes to the church at Philippi, and it goes like this. I thank my God every time I remember you, constantly praying with joy in every one of my prayers for all of you, because of your sharing in the gospel from the first day until now, or because of your partnership in the gospel, or because of your fellowship in the gospel. These are multiple translations of this. We'll come to that in a minute. Because of your sharing in the gospel from the first day until now. I really like this text and have had a lot of fun with it and love Paul. Paul's like a good family member, drives you a little bit crazy, says things you wish he wouldn't have, but then just goes off really wonderfully well. Paul writes this letter, though, and this is really a wonderful thing because they're letters. You know, these aren't books or something else. They're actually just letters written, and he's in prison, and he writes this letter, and I find it stunning what he says. I'm going to just read this just for one more time for you. I thank my God every time I remember you, constantly praying with joy. Now he's in prison, and he's writing this. And he's praying with joy. Come on, get real. And he's praying about a group in a church, constantly praying with joy in every one of my prayers for all of you. Now, you know that's hard to do with people in a church because it's hard to be happy about all of them. And certainly hard to have joy for all of them, and certainly hard to do if you're in prison. But Paul, I think, is sincere in this, constantly praying and remembering you in Eucharisto, in thanksgiving, in joy, charis, with all of you. So I want to come back to all that in a minute, but before I come back to it, I have to describe, Mike was giving dates there, and in 1977, the director of field education at Eden Theological Seminary was a young minister who had come back to the seminary to teach, preaching, and do field education. And he suggested that I was a very young man at the time. I had finished college quickly and was the youngest member in my class at seminary. And I was 22 years old, and I was sent at the advice of this young professor. His name, maybe you all remember, Hale Schreier. Hale sent me to Grace Church in the south side of St. Louis. And I went to be the student pastor at Grace Church to work with Bob McNamara. And many of you will remember Bob. Bob was not at all intense. Bob was a very intense man, but wonderful, and he arranged and helped me get connected right away to lead a canoe trip, a week camp down the Current River in Shannondale. Wonderful thing. We went down, and we had about 18 kids, and I was a co-director, and my other co-director had done all the preliminary work, and was a lay person. I cannot remember his name, nor can I remember where he's from, but I remember many things about him. We got down to Shenandoah and we got all of our camping equipment out to go, because the plan was to canoe as much of the current river as we could in 1 week. And to get started with our canoes and the kids and do a little training, make sure everybody knew how to do it, and load the canoes well and head down the river and camp each night on the gravel bars next to the river. You know this area? You know what I'm talking about. You've probably done this, some of you. And when we started to get ready, my co-director, who was older than I was and experienced and wise and strong, and I was kind of uncertain of myself. I was a 22. I was barely older than these kids that we were taking. And he said, tents. We don't need tents. Let's leave them. So we went without tents, and the weather was perfect. The days were glorious. The sun shone. The river was cool and refreshing. You'd get hot and you'd jump in the river. It was just marvelous. We had sleeping bags. We took those, but no tents. The days were glorious, but it rained every single night. And when I say rain, I don't mean rain. It rained every single night. It didn't rain. It rained like you cannot believe. You'd take your sleeping bag on the gravel bar and you'd put it under a canoe, and the water would come over the canoe, roll around the edges, and drip down onto the sleeping bag. And then when that didn't happen, the wind would blow and the rain would come under the canoe. And you just gave it up. You quit sleeping under canoes because it didn't really matter. And nothing like nothing like being on a gravel bar with a very wet sleeping bag. But it was sunny each day and beautiful, and the bag would get about half dry. And then you'd crawl into it at night. I don't know. It was a hard week. And everything about it seemed weird, and I didn't quit being angry with that co-director. It was difficult, and the kids were well-behaved, sort of, but they had raging hormones. And sleeping on the wet sleeping bags underneath the canoe, chaperoning, it was a hard week. And I was 22. But you know what happened? The most remarkable thing happened. It was cool. We connected in some bizarre, odd way. It was hard and difficult, but we fell in love with each other, these kids and me and even this guy. And we laughed, and we would tell stories, and we would enjoy each other. And when the week was over, as exhausted as we were, having slept or not in a wet sleeping bag, on a gravel bar, in a rainstorm every single night, and yet that miracle happened of being together. You know, in families it's somewhat that way, but this was more than family. This was more than just being with a group of friends. It was, Paul uses the word. It's translated as partnership or sharing or fellowship, but the word is koinonia. It was the miracle that happens when people get together and do church in this remarkable way. It happened on a gravel bar on the current river with a group of kids, but it's happened to me not just there. It had happened several times as I was a kid growing up when the pastor of the church was A. Hale Schreier. It happened in a lot of different ways for me throughout my life, in church camp and in groups and in worship services and with coffee hours and all sorts of ways. It's happened to me where you fall in love with each other in this really interesting, odd, weird way that exceeds even your family. It is the koinonia. Well, you know what I mean. It's why you've done this work that you do and have been doing throughout your life. Because the people in the church drive you crazy, like rainstorms in the middle of the night on gravel bars. Sometimes going to church is like as hard to do as climbing into a wet sleeping bag. It's hard to do, but still, this incredible thing happens, doesn't it? Somebody gets sick, and you pray for each other. Somebody dies, and you go to a funeral. Somebody gets married, and you show up, and you are filled with joy as that happens. A baby is baptized. Something happens. We're connected to each other in incredible ways. It is, as Paul says, koinonia. He's in jail, and he prays for all of them with joy because we are bound together in a remarkable way. I've been blessed, as many of you have, to get to encounter the church in other places, to be with people in different places and connect with them. And it's remarkable, isn't it, that way that we are just kind of bound together, we're part of each other. It's a very fine thing. And when it happened in a gravel bar or in a congregation you were with or with a travel that you did and visited somewhere else, or when you were sick and that care reached out to you, or when you were in need, or when you were in trouble, or when you were lacking hope, someone hoped for you and helped you. It is koinonia, and it has been around for a very, very long time. Well, that was in 1977. Let's fast forward a little bit of time and go to Ann Wilson, who's over here, because in 1981, Ann Wilson was asked to provide the worship leadership for the General Synod of the United Church of Christ. Ann was a pastor in Cahokia, Illinois at the time, and she came to organize and get ready for General Synod, and she called me and asked me, I was living in New York at the time, and whether or not I would be willing to serve on the committee who helped prepare for worship. I had no idea what that meant, but thought, it's the General Synod. It would be cool to do, and I said yes. And then I learned that much of the work I needed to do was to help organize the process so that the General Synod, with its desire to be extraordinarily inclusive, we have this great desire. It's a good thing we've had this desire, but to do so, we had moments of leading prayers all through the Synod, and we had to have different people to do that, one of every kind. And so I was to write them letters and to line them up, and I did all of this work for it. It was a lot of fun, and Ann supervised and helped, and we worked with some others, and it was a very successful synod. It was held at a hockey arena in Rochester, New York. This was in the days before the Americans with Disability Act, and the hockey arena was not handicapped accessible. And so when we get to the hockey arena, we discover that they have this great platform, much like this one, a wonderful platform, and they had a lift on it so that people could come up on it and come across on the lift. And we had someone to pray who was in a wheelchair. And the plan was, we would practice this, he would come, he'd get on the lift, he'd come up, take the lift over, come across onto the platform, and lead the General Synod in prayer. You picture it? So that was the plan. It was a good plan. We had it all worked out. They had built the platform, they'd built the lift, we had the microphone just at the right level. We were at the day in advance getting everybody prepared. He gets on the platform, he takes the lift up, he comes to the edge, and there's just about that much of a gap. And he couldn't get across the platform in the wheelchair. Weeks, months, years of work getting ready for that moment, and there was that much of a gap. And it wasn't possible for him to get across. It was a frustrating experience. You know, you tried as hard as you could to do the right thing, and we still didn't get it done. We had just about that far that we didn't get to and weren't able to get to. It's a hard thing to get that close and not make it. Attention to details are great, but if you don't have the last gap filled, it doesn't work. Paul writes to the church in Philippi, I thank my God every time I remember you, constantly praying with joy in every one of my prayers for all of you, because of your sharing in the gospel from the first day until now. All the way through, from the first day and until now. Listen to the rest of this. I am confident of this, that the one who began a good work among you will bring it to completion by the day of Jesus Christ. Now, I have two things to say about this piece of this that relate to that gap. You know, the first thing I have to say is an advertisement for the pension board. This is the ad. But this is the truth that I already know, and that those of you who participate with the pension board know as well, is that it's been there from the first day all the way through. That it's been in koinonia with us, that it's been part of us, that it's been related to us, that it's not separate from us, it is us. That the pension board of the United Church of Christ is our pension board. But it has a fiduciary responsibility. You know that word? It's a great word. Fiduciary means faithfulness. And it has been stunningly faithful, and it has paid attention to the details, every one of the details, because you can't really drop the ball. If you drop the ball, you can't get across the platform to the place. You can't get the health care you need. You can't get the retirement you need. You can't get the bills paid if you need. And the pension board, this is my unsolicited advertising. I just want to say this with unbelievable pride in what we have done together and what our leadership has done on our behalf, which is to help make sure that the details are there, that we can get across the platform, that we can make it the full way, that we can be supported and encouraged. And I want to just take a moment and say that it gives me great joy to give thanksgiving for the very fine work done on our behalf. So now I've advertised the pension board, but with sincerity. I really mean that. And there have been hard times, but it's just doing a splendid job, and I'm grateful. But I want to go to the second, and this is the last thing I want to say. I am confident of this, Paul writes, that the one who began a good work among you will bring it to completion on the day of Jesus Christ. Of course, this text isn't about the pension board, but it is about our koinonia. It is about the communion and community that we have and the fellowship we share that happens in weird and odd ways and in interesting and funny places, on gravel bars and in church basements, and in worship services where we sing to our heart's content, where we sing and weep and cry, where we hope and pray and engage. It is remarkable. And here's the thing I want to say. Paul, all those years ago, I actually think had it so right, because that koinonia is grounded in the promises of God that have brought us this far but have not yet finished with us, with the promises of God that will take us further still, that God has done a good thing already. Oh, what a good thing God has done. Oh, what a good thing that God has done. Oh, what a good thing that God has done by making us, bringing us into this koinonia, into this fellowship, partnership, fullness of life. But here's the thing. It is not yet finished. And we will know when it's finished this way, because when it is done, there'll be a place at the table for everyone. When it is done, they will beat their swords into plowshares. When it is done, there will be a peace that passes understanding. And the one who's brought us this far, God, our God, will take us all the way. Thanks be to God. Thanks to God with great joy for our koinonia. Thank God for the hard work of the pension board. And thank God that what has already begun will be finished. Amen.